Okay, so welcome to another episode of Critical Conversations in Children's Literature. I'm really excited to have James Brandon on the call with us. He is the author of Ziggy Stardust and Me, which was published in 2019, as well as The Edge of Being, which was published in 2022. And he's going to be telling us about his third book on today's call, along with some tips and tricks of what does it mean to write for YA, along with drafting and beta readers and agenting and editors and all of the wonderful things of what it means to be a young adult author. So with that, Brandon, I'm sorry. With that, Brandon,
That's
thank
good.
you for being with me today.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting. We have a lot to talk about in 30 minutes, so
We do. So let's
it's
get
much to
started.
cover.
Can you tell us a little bit about your previous books, and then we'll jump into all of the wonderful things about writing and being a writer?
Yeah, so Ziggy Stardust and Me, which I'll show you here, and it's these beautiful sprayed edges that I know someone did early on. But anyway, I can't believe this is now it'll be 7 years old this year, which is crazy to me. This is a historical YA. It takes place in the 70s when homosexuality was still considered a mental illness. And it's about Jonathan, who is going through aversion therapy treatments to take care of this illness, who meets Webb, um, and who shatters all of those preconceptions he had about what it means to be gay and not, and living in St. Louis, which is was my life basically. So I started from there and wrote this story, and it's having a whole life of its own now. It's being adapted into a musical. It's doing a whole thing. It's pretty amazing. So I'm excited to see where Ziggy still goes after all these years. And then The Edge of Being came out, as you said, in 2022, and it's also it's a more queer contemporary YA, but all of my books that I work on deal with queer history because I think it's an important lost subject that isn't taught and can be taught more through fiction. I think it's a little bit more accessible that way. So this book, um, Isaac goes on a journey to figure out who his dad is and finds out his dad is a part of a moment in queer history that took place in the 60s in San Francisco, the Compton's cafeteria riots, which were the first recorded trans riots in history, 3 years prior to Stonewall, which everyone knows. So it's to me an important facet to talk about these moments that are lost on us, but also we can gain a lot of knowledge about who we are today and the parallels that we face from our historical figures and historical points of time to deal with, the the chaos of today is
Yes,
the best
the
way to put it.
chaos of today.
Yes. So
Well, thank
anyway,
you
those are,
for sharing
yeah.
those too. So I know you're going to have a lot of fans watching this. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about your process, perhaps with the development of these two books, as well as giving us maybe a taste into what you are currently writing and what we can expect from your next publication.
Yeah, so I think, for me, I love YA. I started there. I love YA books. We were talking earlier, but I generally have a youthful, I've discovered that I have a youthful tone to my voice when I write. It just comes naturally to me. So I've embraced that as my authorial voice. And that is also why I just go towards YA. But I think what I love most about YA is that you're dealing with everything you would deal with in an adult world anyway. The same conflicts, the same issues, that we live in the same world. And yet I feel teenagers have a better ability to deal with conversation and tough topics than adults do, because adults are more set in their ways about what they believe, whereas teenagers are still developing those ideas and they're very open to topics that are a lot tougher for adults to deal with. So I love to write and for YA audiences, and especially crossover, which is where I tend to go with my books. As I said, I really dive into queer history, moments in queer history, and talk about figures in queer history. And I think that in and of itself lends to helping um, bridge the generational gap between YA and adult people. Um, and therefore, the books can be more timeless that way, I feel, when you're able to tap into a universal um, kind of connective issue. So for me, the journey into writing the books, the first one was Ziggy, what really came organically to me because I had never considered writing, but I was, I'm an actor first. That's what I was trained to do, and so for me, it lends itself naturally to writing because acting is character work. And you do deep dives into characters' backstories, and learn about the lines that are given to you. You have to learn why you're saying them. And similarly, as a writer, you need to know why you're writing them, right? So I do a lot of the work I did as an actor, I do as a writer for character work, because I think, a narrative is first and foremost to me character. Um, the characters that stand out to me in my head are the ones I'm going to be writing about and spending a lot of time with. So I gotta like them, right? So, and Ziggy came out of this idea that I didn't know a lot about queer history before I read about this moment that I learned about, and it came from a This American Life podcast, and it was all about this moment in time in the 70s where these factions were fighting when the mental illness, homosexuality was still a mental illness in the DSM, and that was something I didn't even know. So I was ashamed in a way to be gay, an openly gay man, and not know where I came from, not know my ancestry really. And I feel like when we do know our ancestry, we feel more rooted in ourselves and grounded in who we are because there's a connection to a time that came before us that absolutely homosexuals contributed greatly to society, but their names and lives are stamped out and erased because they weren't either allowed to be out or felt safe to be out, or they were, whitewashed over,
Yeah.
as is happening today. So I learned about this and I just started to ruminate on who was this kid that influenced these decisions at the time, which was part of this podcast, what it was all about. And Jonathan came to me because I'm from St. Louis and grew up in a world that was very conservative and I didn't know homosexuality was a real life I could live. I knew it existed, but I didn't know I could be that and live healthily and happily. I knew I was that, but I thought I had to just throw it away because I was told I had to. So all of those feelings, those complex feelings came up through Jonathan for me, and that's how the story evolved. And that has been my inspiration for every story I've written is how can I center queerness in a healthy way and also dive into the historical context of queerness in a way that is acknowledging the trauma, but not always living in the trauma. Um, and how do we move past the trauma of it into a state of hope and joy?
Mhm.
Um, and so that's what each of my books, I think it's important to not ignore the trauma of it. Like Jonathan's story gets very intense and visceral, which is what I wanted. But also, I think out of it comes that deep kind of core trauma can come light and hope if we're allowing ourselves to see it, which is my purpose in writing. Similar with Edge of Being, it was the same thing. I didn't know anything about Comptons, and I wanted to focus the story around that, but not just be about that. I wanted a kid who was going on the journey to discover what it was about to live at that time and who to be and how it was to be connected to someone like that. And with this next book that I'm written, which is tentatively titled, I'm gonna stop because I don't actually want to give that away. I have a weird.
We can wait for the surprise.
Okay, good, because I have a like weird superstitious thing about that. Like I just caught myself. I don't want to jinx anything. Also because it very well could change because Ziggy Stardust to me
Sure.
was not called that at first, and neither was The Edge of Being for that matter. So anyway, this next book is another queer-centered story. It's contemporary, but it deals with a lot of different historical moments in time, queer history moments in time, because it's the general idea of it's a big global treasure hunt that this group of kids goes on. to uncover a very important treasure that could change lives. It's a big story. It feels I'm excited to dive into it. I go into edits with my editor who is going to totally rip it apart. I'm ready for it though. And it will come out in 2027, which I'm super excited about. So
I'm excited about it too. Congratulations on that.
thank you. Thanks. Thank
I do
you.
want to ask a craft question coming out of some of what you've just spoken about, because I do feel like you could have done, let's say, YA memoir, thinking about who Jonathan is and your kind of subsequent stories could have been the story that you chose. However, you decided to go fiction, historical fiction, now contemporary fiction. So I'm wondering for yourself, what made you think, oh, I'm not going to necessarily settle on memoir, rather I'm going to go to fiction? Because I think that is a question that people often ask themselves, like, I have a great
Mm.
story, I want to tell about my life, versus what does it mean to use your story as inspiration to then create other worlds for people to be able to explore these worlds alongside you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, fiction just really excites me more, and I feel like I have such a vivid imagination that I really wanted to place. So the first part of that question for me, answer to that question for me is write what you know, which is something that you hear often about. So I'll start, and then there's a second part that I want to answer to that, but that's the
I'll,
first
I'll write
part.
it down so that we don't forget.
Yeah, good. So that's the first part. And Jonathan is writing what I know for sure. That character is a big piece of me. The father figure was very similar to my own dad. I took from that for sure. I grew up in St. Louis and Creve Coeur specifically, which is where the sh I was going to say the show takes place, the book takes place. Um, but I did not grow up in 73. I'm past that. So that was like, I had to do a ton of research, which is, I highly recommend on anything you do, but even if it's not historical. But for me, 73, I wanted to lock in everything I could about that. And I think the reason why I chose fiction over memoirs because I wanted to, well, I guess for me, because I knew I would be spending years with this, and I knew if I wanted to be spending years with, I wanted it to be a lot of fun along the way, even if it's going to be dealing with some trauma, and which it certainly did, and all my books do. But I think, the passion itself needs to keep itself alive the whole time because that's what's going to keep you going in many moments you'll face along the way where you're like, I can't do this anymore. Like I don't even know, I can't see my way through this, and that just happened to me again after, literally the past few weeks I've been kind of going through, can I do this? I don't know if I can see this. I can because I have, and that's what you have to keep telling yourself along the way. And the thing that has kept me going is the passion through which I want to tell this story. For me, memoir would limit that because there's only so much I want to share about myself with the world, right? Like I believe in sustaining a sense of privacy about who I am too. And there's something to be said about holding on to self for protective reasons, but also to cultivate self through those reasons. So I think if I were writing memoir, I would feel the need to share more about who I really am than I'd want to. So it's easier for me to fictionalize a character. In some ways, it actually allows me to go deeper because the character is fictional, but I can explore all my feelings through this fictional being. Um, and the reason why they're rooted in such realness is because they're a part of who I am. Now, every character I've written has some parts of who I am, for sure. Even Hal, who is the kind of main monster antagonist in Ziggy, there's certainly a piece of me in him, like I have to recognize the wounds that this awful person has to make them more human on the page. I may not absolutely agree with anything they're doing and saying, but I've certainly recognized those people in the world. So, and they're real. So it's important, I think, for me to uh, step away from the super personal in order to create a more accessible world to more people. I guess that's how I see it. Like that's what fiction has the ability to do. I have a lot of readers who aren't gay at all, who are actually straight white females, right? Or
Mhm.
older,
Mhm.
who get Jonathan. And I feel like the reason why that is they find their way in through the 70s or they find their way in through some other outlet. And if it was strictly about me and my story, I don't know necessarily that they would be able to do that, you know?
Mhm.
Um, the second part to that answer was the first one was write what you know. But then, for instance, right now, um, I'm writing a murder mystery. Well, I have never murdered. So I can't, you know what I
Thank
mean?
goodness.
Thank goodness,
Thank
yes. I
goodness.
may have had a thought at one point, but no. I can't even imagine getting to that point. So, the research I've had to, so I can't say I write what I know in this sense, or like 73. I didn't know a lot about that. So, I think the other piece of that is, yes, write what you start's a good starting point to write what you know, but the other part is write what you don't know so you can learn about it and really help other people learn about it too. Like that's gift to me. I'm such a research book nerd. I love, and for me, like, yes, online is great, but I like to actually go to the library and like dig in books and like really dig into stuff because it's just visceral to me. Like I'll go to the historical society, the LGBTQ historical society in San Francisco. They have archives for decades, right? Where you can actually touch clothing and flip through scrapbooks and read letters. And I get that to me is when you're really in touch with those things, you can bring that more into your writing. That's for me. I feel more connected to the history than even if it's not historical book I'm writing, I'm connected to a person of that time that can give me more visceral feeling and emotion when I'm writing.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so I feel like write what you know and challenge yourself to write what you don't know so that you can really dive into being what I think our job as a writer to do is to be compassionate creatures who can help write about humanity and create a new humanity through the words we write, you know? I mean, it's a lofty thing and it might be sound a little hyperbolic, but I don't know. I think that's any really great timeless book has been able to do that. So,
Yeah.
if we're able, if I'm not saying that's the purpose for writing, I don't think that's what we should set out to do. But I think knowing that we as writers need to be really like attuned to what's going on in the world and the people around us and observing it and, being very aware of what it means to be human. Um, we can't write truth if we're not experiencing it ourselves. And the only way to do that is to live it, right? And to be in it and to observe it and to be able to capture that same feeling through a place of authenticity.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm. Mhm. And
yeah.
so, what I'm hearing in terms of your methods, so you're
Yeah.
definitely an archivist, or you
Yeah.
enjoy being in the archives as one form of method. You also believe in terms of embodiment, and I'm going completely academic here because
Yeah.
this is how I
Great.
understand it.
Yeah.
Um, what are some other ways, thinking of perhaps tips for those whose experiences may not reflect the kind of characters that they are writing? And this is often a conversation when it comes to how diversity works in
Mm.
children's literature and in literature. And I know we don't have as much time, but I'm
Yeah.
wondering if there are one or two things you think you might want to share on that second part, which is writing from what you don't know. How might you, other than research, because I know for Ziggy, you were also a part of a community of in order to write web, thinking
Mm.
about what does it mean to write from a diverse experience that or an ethnic experience that is not your own or a race experience that's not your own. So I'm wondering if
Right.
maybe you can provide just a short context, even though this is
I,
like an hour long
yeah,
conversation in itself. What were
easily.
some of the things that you did to make sure that you were able to reflect on that second half of voices or spaces or identities that weren't your own but still showed up in your work?
That is an excellent question. You're right. It is like a huge dialogue that's important to have. I mean, it's everywhere right now, right? I mean, I know right now, and even in the queer spaces of writing, there's a lot of discourse about if you can people who aren't queer write queer main characters. Absolutely. I absolutely think they can, and there's lots of ways to do it right, and I know a lot of people that do it right. And for me, um, the way that I handled Webb's character, so prior to even starting the novel, um, I was a part of the Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirit organization. I volunteered for them. That's a huge thing to get into. I don't even need to get into all that, but that's where it started for me. Webb's character was seated within that community because of I was in that community, um, and the way they kind of came into my life at a time of great need, I guess is the word. This was several years ago. And within that community, I have since like grown quite like integrated within that community for many years. I was on the board of the Bay Area Americans because of all of this, and just kind of they're a huge part of my life. And the idea of of writing web came from um, the friendships that I formed with them. And I think that's where you have to start as a writer. Research is great, but you can't write about someone just by reading about them. I think you really have to be friends with them. You have to know them in your life. And if you don't, I don't really think you have any right to write about them. And if you really are passionate about writing about someone outside of your own lane, and you don't have those friends, you better first make them, and get out there, because there's some reason then that you are being pulled to that, right? And start from that place within for self. That's where I would start as a writer, but just as a human, like there's some part of you craving. So for me, I was on this tour doing a play of Corpus Christi, and we were in San Francisco, and a group of two spirit people who I later identified themselves as such came and saw the show and talked to me after and did this whole thing. And I, as a young gay white male, cis male, didn't know what two-spirit even was at that time. This was long before anything was even planted in my head about writing Ziggy. And it was in that moment that I realized, if I'm going to go around and do the show about Jesus, celebrating queerness in a spiritual, religious realm, how can I do that if I don't even know who my community is, right? So it was very important to me. I got to know what Two Spirit meant, the what gay native meant, what, all of those different factions of our queer lives. And it started there. So I started to build friendships outside of my own gay, white, cis het male, not het, cis male. Sorry, definitely not het. Cis male world, right? Like, that's its own bubble in itself. And I wanted to burst that. That's where it started for me. And then as I became friends with them and I started to develop this book of Ziggy with Jonathan, I was like, he needs a love interest. And I wanted something that was totally opposite of Jonathan, which Webb was and became. And Webb is fighting a whole different battle than Jonathan is, and I wanted that too. And a lot of those ideas came from my friends. And then once that happened, once I realized this is what I wanted to do, I knew here's a kind of full disclosure statement. No matter how much work you do, there will always be people who don't agree with it, that just you won't do it right for them. And that's okay. I think as long as you do everything you can to do the best you can, and that not only means becoming friends with people, but also doing the thorough work to understand, once you do the writing, make sure that you have readers within that community who are reading it, who are giving, and you are listening to that feedback you're given, that you are incorporating it, that you are going over and over and over through their lens about what works and what doesn't, which is exactly what this work went into with this book. Um, and you're learning about microaggressions that you may not know about. You're learning about things you can't write about within the culture, that you may just think you can, but you learn you can't. There's all sorts of different things that you need to pay attention to as a writer when you're writing outside your lane. And even then, even if doing all of that stuff, there will still be people who are like, no, you shouldn't be doing that. I don't think that should stop you from pursuing it, nor do I feel like, nor has it stopped me from pursuing it with further future books I'm writing. I just feel like that limits the amount of characters that we can create. And I think in the world where we as writers are wanting to create, which for me is a more just, equitable world for everyone's voice to be heard and the same on the same level, I can't live in that world I want to be in if I'm not then creating it in my work that I'm putting out there in the world. So I feel like it's very powerful. I think it's important that we do that work, but I think it's also very important you do the ton of legwork beforehand in order to get to this place.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and to know that you may never always get it right. And that as long as you continue to learn from those, um, I think, to me, I think that's the best way to, move forward as a writer who's creating a diverse world in their books, especially YA, because that's what YA audiences expect, you
Exactly.
know. So,
Exactly. I agree.
yeah,
I think it's so complicated, but I do think having these conversations are important. Otherwise, we
yeah,
would all just be writing memoir. And that is
yeah,
also complicated because how I
yeah.
reflect on something as a child may not be how let's say, my sister experienced it, right? And so no one's
Right,
going to have the same perspective, even if it is my story. But how do we
right.
do that in an ethical way and a vulnerable way? How are we in community? So you're talking about the archives, you're talking about embodiment, you're also talking
Mhm,
specifically about community. And it's not,
mhm.
and I do want to clarify that I don't think you're saying like, oh, I want to write about this community. Let me get into that community so I can write about them. That's like anthropology
No,
1900, like
yeah,
that's no
no,
longer what we do. But you were already recognizing that this is a community that you are technically a part of. However, it was much more expansive than you already had access to, or that you had previously had access to. And now people were inviting you into that community. It wasn't like, I'm staking my
yeah,
claim into this. I want to write about this
no.
community. You were invited in and you saw that as an opportunity for representation.
That's right. Thank you for that clarification, because absolutely, that's what I mean. Like, I never, this book was never like devised and then I went into and figured out how to make it work. It came out of an organic place of this was a part of my life already, right? And but the reason why I brought up the fact of even getting to Bates in the first place was because I didn't know them. I didn't know Two Spirit existed, and that made me angry
Hmm.
because I should have. And I now do, obviously, very well. And I think what's important about what I've actually heard from readers is that they didn't know about it either, and now they have a way in. And I always encourage, whenever I hear that, I always encourage them, well, now it's time to do your work. Go out there and get to know them. But I definitely think, like, if you are, I guess what my point too is, like, if you are inclined at all for whatever reason in your narrative to create a character that's outside of your lane and you don't know those people, I wouldn't say, well, now you can go into them to get to know them so that you can write about them. No, my first thought is it's actually not about the book at all. It's about you as a human wanting to know these people for some reason, wanting to be friends with them. Do that first.
Hmm.
Don't write about it. Don't go in there because there's some part of you that's craving this connection to another part of humanity that you're not connected to. And that to me is where it starts just for human self. And has nothing to do with writing. Now,
Hmm.
maybe a character will come out of that eventually, but that would not be my reason in at all. My first reason would be like, I want to know people who don't like me, like, period.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't, but again, like, um, I personally, I think all of my main protagonists are always going to be white, um, gay males. Basically, that's just what I feel most comfortable writing as a main protagonist. But the characters surrounding them are equally important to get right, so, and I want to create a diverse world with them. Like the next book I'm writing is in San Francisco, takes place in San Francisco, and that is a very diverse community there that I've been a huge part of. And I want that to be reflected in my book. I wouldn't, that would be, it would be inauthentic if it was just all white characters. It just wouldn't make sense. So certainly there are, like, there's a trans character in there. I'm not trans, but I've got many trans friends and they're helping me. They've helped me. And when I've asked questions and just got really been like, tell me what's up with this. Like, um, I just think that, there's conscious ways in to deal with these kinds of issues that every writer can be more aware of. And I think that that's just an important tool to have. As not just, I keep saying this, but not just writers, as humans. I just think right now this world is, it can there there's it's such a divisive world right now, and but I don't think it actually is the thing. I think they want it, they want us to think it is. But I think the more we connect to each other on just a human innate level, the more we can understand the complexities of where we're coming from right now. So
Thank you for that. I know we are out of time, but I do want to just spend like
yeah.
the last few minutes talking about your latest book, book three. Um,
Yeah.
Maybe talk a little bit about the process. What is it like? What stage are you in of the book? What is it like to know that a year from now this book will be out and in the world? How are you feeling about that? What is your process and what is your feeling towards this third book? Especially
um
congratulations on getting like to a third book because
Thank
not
you.
everyone
Yeah.
does, right?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm very lucky to have an editor whom I love and whom loves me. And we just understand each other really, really well. We bring out the best in each other, I think, in terms of writing. So that is the first kind of obstacle I think I overcame. And, she's taught me so much along the way. I mean, I feel like I've taken master classes with one of the best editors in the business along the way because I'm kind of, I didn't go to school for writing. So I'm a self-taught writer in a lot of ways. And she's taught me a lot along the way. And with this next book, it's been through so many drafts, and it started out as an adult book. Um, but again, it just some I wrote it and it just kept writing about it. It's just something that just never felt right about it. And then an editorial assistant in my agency in my own agent, she was like, well, because this is YA. And both my agent are like, oh my God, it is. And everything kind of clicked at that point. So, and once that happened, it got sent to Stacy, who's my editor, and she bought it from there. And, her reaction to it was like, she's, really loved it. And her first response was, we have to cut 20 pages and it's going to go through two full rewrites. So, you know, that's daunting to think about, but it's also part of the process and it's scary. And I have since gotten to a place of, we were talking about this earlier, where it's like, you know, I don't think, I don't know any author who doesn't, even after their 10th book, who doesn't get still question if they can do it, who doesn't get to that point of, I can't see my way through this. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. I can't see. They're giving me all these notes and I don't know what to do with them. But they've done 10 books prior to that still. You know what I mean? So I lean on that to know that I have at least had two books that have published and I can do it again. And similar, something just happened with a new book I'm writing, where the editor assistant came back to me and was like, the seeds are there, but it's not quite there. And let's rewrite the entire thing, basically. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do this. But then you sit back and be like, yes, you can. You've done it before. And that's kind of what I think is a constant reminder an author needs to make with themselves. That and the passion for what is in the story, that you really have to tell this specific story. If it wasn't there, it's very easily, it kind of separates the lions of the lambs, right? Like, the people who can keep going and get published eventually keep going.
Mm.
But it's hard to keep going when you're constantly having to change and rewrite and rethink and recalibrate and replot and all of that. But that's what it means to be a writer. You create the seed of the world, which I always picture as this like beautiful prism. And just when an editor comes in, they just are turning the prism so that it's reflecting a different part of the world, but it's the same world you created.
Mhm.
And you do keep turning that until eventually the story that wants to be told comes out. So it's exciting that I'm excited to work with Stacey again this year. I love that process with her. It's hard, but it's really it's visceral, it's raw, it's like we get in it with each other, like it's just, to me, it's this is the part of the journey I love the most, is really digging in, and clarifying the story I know that's there, I want to tell, and she helps me tell it, and I'm lucky like that. And I'm super excited that the world gets to see it next year. I mean, I there used to be, it was like, oh my God, like the world's going to see it, but now it's like, oh my God, the world gets to see it, like it's kind of one of those things, like you're with it for so long, you forget that actually someone else will be able to experience the world you've created. And you think about, like, for me, that I've had Ziggy and Edge of Being out, and I've had many readers reach out to me who have been moved or seen in some new way, or feel like they've been heard in a new way. Like, you hear all of these things, and that's, for me, now that I've got that under my belt, there's one part, there's a sense of pressure added to that, to want to live up to that expectation. That can be a very hard place as an author. That's a whole other conversation. But the other part of it is really the inspiration behind what readers can give back to you, and how that is a fuel for the fire to keep going, because you've touched some lives with your words, which is didn't I never expected that to happen. And it's a gift that I cherish and I take very full responsible the responsibility for, and take it very seriously now. So that is a drive for me to continue to reach people in new ways that they hadn't been reached before.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for being on today's episode. I learned so much from you, and I know I'm going to keep learning so much from you. Do you have like a last farewell to anyone who was currently writing and they're just like, I can't do this? Any last words of wisdom?
Yeah, I would say you absolutely can, because you've gotten to as far as you've gotten with it.
Mhm.
So if you hadn't gotten to that place, you wouldn't have been able to get you wouldn't have been able to get there if you couldn't have if you hadn't done the work to begin with. So the fact that you got to where you're at, you can keep going, and you can keep making it better, because this is the thing I always tell myself. You made up the world, you can remake it.
It's true. That is true. That is really, really
Right?
true. Yeah, it's your
You made it all
imagination.
up. So make it all up again. I say it's that easy, and it's not. I recognize that. But for me, the old adage that writing is rewriting is just, it's like a process of becoming human. We're an ever evolving species. You as LaShawn, me as Brandon, we're every day brings a new set of challenges that allows us to grow, allows us to evolve. We're a process as a human. That's what, to me, as I look at writing, it is a process. It's never ending. Even when it's published, it's got its own life, and it's never ending. It becomes something else to someone else, right? So it's an ever evolving experience that I think, as long as you live within that and not think it's like an end destination, um, there's for me, there's a lot of relief and peace in that, and ease to know this is a journey that we've chosen to take, and that we've chosen to take. We chose this, and we can choose how we perceive to deal with it. And for me, it at times it can be really challenging and struggle. But when I work through that and realize, but I'm choosing this, I want to do this. There's such joy and hope in that for me, because I'm so excited that I get to put words to a page and eventually tell a story that might move somebody somewhere in the world. That's what keeps me going.
Well, we'll leave that as today's mic drop.
Good.
Well, thank you
Awesome.
so much for being with us today, and I hope to have
Thank you.
you on another episode soon.
Thank you, LaShawn.